afternoon, everybody. As you know, this week we are not starting a new novel. This week we are going to read different books about Harriet Tubman so that we can continue our Civil War study. So yesterday you listened to the author of Before She Was Harriet read this book. You made your lantern. And today we are going to read An Apple for Harriet Tubman. And then tomorrow, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, we're going to read a chapter each of Harriet Tubman and the Freedom Train. Okay. So today we're going to read An Apple for Harriet Tubman by Glenette Tilly Turner and illustrated by Susan Keeter. Harriet was born into slavery around the year 1820. And remember, we're not sure exactly the year that she was born because at that time they did not have the best records, especially of slaves being born. Harriet was born into slavery around the year 1820. Her parents, Ben and Rip Ross, were enslaved on the Brodess plantation in Maryland. Because their parents were the property of Edward Brodess, Harriet and her brothers and sisters belonged to him too, the law said. So she was born. When she was born, she was already a slave. The slaves had a hard life. They chopped down trees, cleared swamps, tended the tobacco fields, and did all the other jobs on the Brodess plantation. The slaves didn't get paid and had to do everything their overseers told them to do. Even the children had to work. So if you look in the picture here, you'll see the young children working in the tobacco fields. When Harriet was only 7, so that's, most of you guys are right around 7. When Harriet was only 7, Edward Brodess sent her to work for an unkind woman named Miss Susan. One of Harriet's jobs was to sit up all night taking care of Miss Susan's baby so her crying would not wake her mother. If the baby did cry, Miss Susan would whip Harriet. So can you imagine at your guys' age being responsible for this baby all night long and keeping him or her from crying, which is almost impossible. Later on, Harriet worked in the fields. She liked working outdoors where she could feel the fresh breezes, see the sunshine, and watch birds fly free. Picking apples was her favorite job to do outdoors. Whenever she held a shiny red apple in her hands, she wished, oh how she wished that she could take a big bite of it. She longed to know if it tasted as good as it looked. She didn't like the fact that she and other slaves were expected to pick, wash, and polish these luscious-looking apples, but were forbidden to eat any. She didn't think it was fair that slaves did all the work and the family in the big house got to eat the apples. Each day as Harriet picked and polished apples, she looked for a chance to crunch into one. One day, when the overseer was walking down to the other end of the orchard, she thought, this is my chance. So what do you think is going to happen? Just as she was biting deep into the delicious apple, an overseer whirled around and caught her. Angrily, he took his whip and lashed Harriet. The whip tore through her clothing and into her flesh. It left scars that lasted the rest of her life. She couldn't fight back or do anything about it, but she made herself a promise. One day, I'm going to be free, and I'm going to have all the apples I want. And if you look closely at this picture, you can see the scars from where she was whipped. So can you imagine, she's the age that you guys are, and she's not allowed to even eat an apple. Years passed, and Harriet married a free man by the name of John Tubman. In 1849, she learned that she might be sold and sent away from her husband and sisters and brothers. Harriet took action. She ran away from the Brodess plantation. She walked until she reached a safe house, which was a place where she knew members of the Underground Railroad would help her. And you guys remember we talked about the Underground Railroad when we read The Patchwork Path. and how they used the quilts as messages, signals along the Underground Railroad. The Underground Railroad was not a railroad, but a group of black and white men and women who took great risk to help people escape from slavery. Then, through dense forest and chilly swamps, she followed the North Star toward the north and freedom. She was always on the lookout for slave hunters and their bloodhound dogs. Later, Harriet was hidden in a farm wagon and took to another safe house. Finally, she reached the Delaware Bay in the state of Delaware. A boatman helped her cross from the New Jersey shore. From there, she made her way to Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Here in the north, she was free, just as she had promised herself that she would be. And do you remember from the beginning of the book, what did she promise herself that she would do? Once she became free, what does she want to have? But Harriet was not happy living in freedom while her family was still enslaved. She went to work as a maid and a cook. She saved her money and went back again and again to Maryland to free her family and lead many other people out of slavery. This was extremely dangerous for Harriet to do. There was a huge reward for her capture. The slaveholders were very angry that she had become an Underground Railroad conductor, guiding other slaves to freedom, but she and her passengers were never caught. So if you notice on this page, I'll hold it close so you can see, the words conductor and passengers are in quotation marks. And so that means, just like the Underground Railroad was not actually a railroad, they're using the word conductor because she was a leader in the Underground Railroad, but she was not actually a conductor because it wasn't actually a railroad. And same thing with passengers. Those were the people that she was helping, but it's in quotation marks because they were not actually passengers. So they're just using that to continue that metaphor. In 1869, Harriet bought a house near Auburn, New York, and she planted rows of what? What do you think she's going to plant? Think back to the beginning of the story. Rows of apple trees along the lane that led from the road to her home. It had taken a long time, but she was finally able to keep the second part of her promise that she had made to herself. So she promised herself that she would be free, and when she was, that she was going to have as many apples as she wanted. Each fall, when the apples were ripe and ready for picking, Harriet Tubman had all the apples she could eat, and she invited the townspeople to come and fill their baskets. Harriet Tubman's apples were a symbol of freedom for everyone to share. Okay. So this was an apple for Harriet, which talks about mostly when she was a little girl and growing up a slave, and then talks about how she became part of the Underground Railroad and a leader. Yesterday we read Before She Was Harriet, which told all about her life and the many names that she had. And then tomorrow we'll start chapter 1 of this book, Harriet Tubman and the Freedom Train. Very good. Okay, see you tomorrow.